All right, impeachment. All right, so there's been a lot of talk about impeachment these days. So, just for clarification here, impeachment just simply means to put a president on trial for some wrongdoing. In order to be removed, there has to be a two-thirds majority. There has to be a vote in the Senate for removal. So in March 1867, because again, radical Republicans, and I would say most Republicans by this time, have become pretty disenchanted with Johnson because he's very difficult to work with. He doesn't like criticism. If he doesn't like something, he will veto it, even if it sounds good. Like the Civil Rights Bill. Who is going to veto the Civil Rights Bill? Andrew Johnson. So in Congress, I will say they come up with a plan to get Johnson out that is completely legal. They come up with a law that Johnson will violate. Johnson had this thing where he liked to fire people, and so in 1867, in March 1867, Congress adopts an act called the Tenure of Office Act. The Tenure of Office Act barred the president from removing certain office holders without getting Senate consent. But remember, Johnson liked to fire people. So in February 1868, so almost a year later, Johnson decided to remove the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton. And he did not do it with Senate approval or Senate consent. And so the House of Representatives will approve the articles of impeachment, and they'll present charges against Johnson to the Senate, which would then have to decide whether or not to remove him with a vote. The vote for removal, again, is that there has to be a two-thirds majority, not a simple majority. So Johnson is tried for high crimes and misdemeanors, and the final tally ends up being 35 to 19, which is one vote short of the necessary vote for removal. Okay, so he's just one vote short. Had the tally been 36 to 18, he would have been removed as well, but he is impeached and not removed. The next election year is 1868, and Republicans will nominate Ulysses S. Grant to to be the president or to be the Republican candidate for election. Ulysses S. Grant is pretty well known at this time. He was a career military man, and after the Civil War, he is seen a bit as a hero, but people know who he is. And so in 1868, he wins the election, and so Ulysses S. Grant will become the president, thus ushering in this new period of Reconstruction called Radical Reconstruction. So, Radical Reconstruction is from 1867 to 1877. Okay, so in February of 1869, the 15th Amendment is approved and it's ratified in 1870. The 15th Amendment prohibited federal and state governments from denying any citizen the right to vote because of race. So the 15th Amendment gave Black men the right to vote. Now, with the passage of the Reconstruction Act, which divided the South into five military districts, with Black men giving the right to vote, and with the passage of the 15th Amendment, we really see radical Reconstruction rev up in the South. Now, throughout Reconstruction, Black voters will provide the bulk of Republican support. 2,000 African Americans during the period of Reconstruction will occupy public office in many different levels in both local and state and federal government. Black people will be represented again at every level of government during Reconstruction. With Black people given the right to vote, we'll also see Black men serve in the House of Representatives as well as the Senate. So 14 Black men will be elected to the House of Representatives. Two Black men will serve in the Senate during the period of Reconstruction. Our first Black senator was named Hiram Revels, and he was elected in 1875. I'm sorry, in 1870. Our second Black senator was Blanche K. Bruce, and he was elected in 1875. After Reconstruction ends in 1877, we see a huge reduction in the gains made by African Americans during Reconstruction. You'll also notice that I have started calling people African American and Black American by this time because the 14th Amendment was passed that said that if you were born in the United States, you are a citizen. Prior to that, Black people didn't have citizenship, they didn't have any protection under the law. If we go back to the late 1850s with the Dred Scott decision, it essentially said that, look, you're not a citizen. You cannot even bring petitions in this court. But I digress. So as we have two Black senators during Reconstruction, Hiram Revels and Blanche Bruce. We will not see another Black man elected to the Senate until 1967. So people usually wonder, well, what happened? Why why is there this reduction in representation, um, you know, during and after the Reconstruction period? Well, even though the Civil War ended in 1865, the violence didn't come to an end. In fact, just a year after the Civil War ends, this nation's foremost domestic terrorist organization was founded. That organization was the Ku Klux Klan. It was founded in 1866 in Tennessee, and it's this terrorist organization would eventually spread into nearly every state. It's led by planters and former Confederates, merchants, Democratic politicians, people who are really at the top of Southern society, and some of those, again, who are at the bottom. And they will commit, I would say, some of the most brutal crimes in American history. Now, while they will not just lynch and kill African Americans, especially men, will bear the brunt of violence. So there's this uptick in violence. The violence doesn't come to an end just because the Civil War comes to an end. So, one thing that Grant does is he will pass a number of enforcement acts. And these enforcement acts were passed and adopted in an effort to try to help suppress the Klan. So, three laws were passed in 1870 and 1871 that tried to eliminate the KKK by outlawing it and other domestic terrorist societies. It also, these enforcement acts allowed the president to deploy the army down to the South for the purpose of suppressing violence. And so that will restore a lot of peace in the South. There has to be an army, a federal police presence, really to protect Black people in the South at this time. So this is how Black people are able to vote, because the Klan is not hanging out in front of the ballot box. The Klan is not hanging out at the polling place, right? So when they're not there to intimidate voters, you're going to see a lot more political participation. However, if they're not there, and if the army isn't there, you see a lot of violence. So, in 1860 or 1875, a Civil Rights Act is passed. The Civil Rights Act of 1875 outlawed racial discrimination in places of public accommodation. Now, by the 1870s, even though Grant passed this series of enforcement acts and sent the army down, by the mid 1870s, uh, this democratic force, and they will call themselves the Redeemers because they are really trying to redeem the South from what they will term as Black rule. So they want to redeem the South, or essentially regain control of Southern politics and Southern life. So by the mid 1870s, Redeemers will begin to regain control of some states with pretty substantial with pretty substantial white voting majorities, and violence will begin to erupt again. In 1877, Republicans, or I was at 1876, Republicans nominate Rutherford B. Hayes to uh, succeed uh, Ulysses S. Grant. So Grant has served 2 terms. It's not illegal for a president to run a third term. It's just no one has done it because the precedent was set by Washington that you only serve 2 terms. So Grant has finished his 2 terms, and so Republicans will nominate Rutherford B. Hayes to succeed Grant. And Grant's opponent at this time is a man by the name of Samuel Tilden, and it's a really, really close election. It's one of these elections that, if CNN had been around at this time, there would have been a big banner saying too close to call, right? It's a very, very close election. And so Hayes's representatives and Tilden and his representatives kind of have this backroom conversation where they're like, look, Tilden says essentially, look, I will allow you can have the presidency. I will bow out if, right? I will bow out if you agree to let Democrats really control the South. If you agree to remove federal troops from the South, I will bow out gracefully, and you can have it. And Hayes and his representatives say, okay, that works. And so that is how Reconstruction ends. I wish I could say there was this big fight and there was this fight to the death. And it's like, no, it ended with a bargain. It ended with the bargain of 1877, whereby Hayes agrees to remove federal troops from the South who are providing protection to freedmen so they can, participate in politics. So there's not this reign of terror, of unchecked terror. Hayes is just like, yeah, I'll remove federal troops from the South. As long as Tilden bows out, which he did, and so that ends Reconstruction. So next class, our next lecture, which will be Module 2, will be going into Chapter 16. So please read Chapter 16, and I'll see you next week with another lecture. Please remember to do your discussion, and remember that in order to receive full credit for your discussions, you must write an essay format, meaning you have to have an introduction with a clearly stated thesis, body, and a conclusion, and you must reply to at least 2 of your classmates in complete sentences of at least 5 or more sentences. All right. Well, I will see you guys later. Deuces.